Why is there a beggar here?
Sir, I'm the nurse assigned to...
A nurse? You look like a rat that just crawled out of a refugee camp, smelly and ragged.
I am wearing my uniform, sir.
You dare argue with me?
He bent down.
You only deserve to stand guard like my stinky black dog.
You've crossed the line.
He slapped her, hard.
That's what filth like you deserves.
He straightened his cufflinks.
Now get out before I have you dragged out.
The crack echoed across the ballroom like a whip. A red handprint burned across her cheek. Jaw locked, eyes steady. Standing behind Harrington, his bodyguard was staring at the scar on her forearm. No one knew what would happen next, a turn of events that would completely change their lives. This is the story of a nurse who stood her ground, and a billionaire who wished she hadn't. The Grand Meridian Hotel sat on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street, like a cathedral made of glass and marble. Tonight, its main ballroom hosted the 6th annual Hearts for Heroes Gala, a fundraiser for veterans' medical care. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted in gold leaf. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne between tables draped in ivory linen. The guest list read like a Forbes directory. Surgeons, senators, hedge fund managers, and tech founders, all dressed in black tie, all smiling for the cameras. Naomi Anderson arrived through the service entrance at 6:15. She carried a medical duffel over one shoulder and wore plain white scrubs with a laminated volunteer badge clipped to her chest. No jewelry, no makeup. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished marble as she crossed the loading dock and made her way to her assigned station. A folding table near the east wall of the ballroom, stocked with a first aid kit, an AED unit, and a blood pressure cuff. She was 38 years old, a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital in the Bronx, where she worked the overnight shift in the emergency room 4 nights a week. Her colleagues knew her as the one who showed up early and left late, the one who sat with homeless patients when no family came, the one who never raised her voice, even when the ER turned into a war zone at 2 in the morning. What none of them knew, what almost no one in the country knew, was who Naomi Anderson had been before she became a nurse. She set up her station quietly, arranged the supplies, checked the oxygen tank, tested the AED battery. She had done this at 14 charity events in the past 3 years. Always the same routine, always invisible. Around her, the ballroom filled with laughter and clinking glasses. A jazz quartet played Cole Porter in the corner. The centerpieces alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. At 7:40, Victor Harrington made his entrance. He walked through the double doors like he owned the building, which, through a network of shell companies, he partially did. 55 years old, silver-haired, tanned from a week in the Maldives. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo and a Patek Philippe watch that caught the light every time he raised his hand to wave at someone. His wife, Margaret, walked 2 steps behind him in a black Valentino gown. She smiled at no one in particular. Harrington was the CEO of Harrington Health Systems, a chain of 42 private hospitals stretching from Connecticut to Virginia. His name was on the gala's platinum donor wall. His face was on the program cover. He had given the keynote speech at this event 3 years running. Tonight, he planned to announce a new wing at his flagship hospital in Greenwich. He was also, by every account of his former employees, a man who treated anyone beneath his tax bracket like furniture. Behind Harrington, 3 steps back and to the right, walked Ethan Cole. Ethan was 36, square jaw, close-cropped hair, a build that filled out his dark suit without trying. He moved the way former Marines moved, eyes scanning the room in a slow, continuous sweep, weight balanced, hands free. He had been Harrington's personal bodyguard for 2 years. Before that, he had spent 8 years in the United States Marine Corps, including 2 combat deployments. He had a small tattoo on the inside of his left wrist. Just 2 words and a year. Kandahar, 2015. That tattoo was the only thing Ethan Cole ever talked about when he drank too much. And even then, he never said what happened. He only said that he should have died that night, that 14 men should have died, and that the reason they didn't had a name he could never forget. But tonight, Ethan was working. He positioned himself against the far wall, 10 feet behind Harrington's reserved table. He scanned the exits, the windows, the waitstaff. His gaze swept past the nurse's station near the east wall without pausing. He did not recognize the woman in white scrubs. Not yet. Naomi checked her watch. 8:15. The speeches would start soon. She poured herself a cup of water from the pitcher on her table and stood with her back against the wall, watching 300 of the wealthiest people in New York eat filet mignon and laugh about things that cost more than her car. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Invisible, useful, forgotten. That would not last the night. It started the way these things always start. Not with a bang. With a glass of champagne and a man who had too many of them. By 9 o'clock, Victor Harrington had finished his keynote speech and was working the room like a campaign trail. Handshakes, backslaps, the kind of laugh that came out louder than it needed to. Margaret stayed close, steering him away from the open bar twice, but by 9:30 he had slipped past her and was holding his fourth, or fifth, glass of Dom Perignon. He was standing near the center of the ballroom, telling a group of investors about the new surgical wing in Greenwich, when he noticed Naomi. She was refilling her water pitcher at the service station, 20 feet from his table. White scrubs, brown skin, a laminated badge swinging from her chest. Harrington stopped mid-sentence. "Excuse me." He held up a finger to his circle. 1 second. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who had never been told no in a room full of people who depended on his money. "You," he pointed at Naomi with his champagne flute. "What are you doing here?" Naomi turned. She held the water pitcher steady. "I'm the volunteer nurse, sir, assigned to the East Station." "The East Station?" He looked past her at the folding table, the first aid kit, the AED. He wrinkled his nose. "That's 15 feet from where my guests are eating." "That's where the organizers placed me, sir." "Well, the organizers made a mistake." He took a sip of champagne. "You're killing the atmosphere. People are trying to enjoy a $2,000 plate, and they have to look at—" He gestured at her, head to toe, like he was describing a stain on the carpet. "This." Naomi said nothing. She set the pitcher down and clasped her hands in front of her. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Harrington stepped closer. His voice dropped to what he probably thought was a private tone, but champagne had ruined his volume control. Half the nearby tables could hear him. "This is not the place for someone like you. You don't belong here." "I was invited by the event committee, sir." "The event committee works for me." He jabbed his finger toward the service entrance. "Go wait in the kitchen, or the parking lot. I don't care. Just get out of the dining area." Naomi did not move. She stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, her hands still clasped, her chin level. The same posture she held when a drunk patient swung at her in the ER. The same posture she had held in places far worse than a ballroom. "Sir, I'm required to stay within reach of my medical station in case of an emergency." "An emergency?" He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that wanted an audience, and it got one. Heads turned. Conversations paused. "What emergency? Someone chokes on a shrimp and you're going to save them? With what training? A weekend course at a community college?" A few people at the nearest table exchanged glances. One woman looked down at her plate. No one spoke. "I'm a registered nurse with 12 years of experience, sir." 12 years. He swirled his champagne. 12 years and you're still volunteering at charity dinners for free? That tells me everything I need to know about your career." The words hung in the air like smoke. Naomi felt the heat rise up the back of her neck, but her face stayed flat. She had learned a long time ago that reacting was exactly what men like this wanted. A flinch, a tear, anything they could point to and call weakness. She gave him nothing. "I'm going to stay at my station, sir." Harrington's jaw tightened. He was not used to hearing that word. No. Not from employees, not from board members, and certainly not from a woman in scrubs who he had already decided was beneath the conversation. "You know what your problem is?" He stepped so close she could smell the champagne on his breath. You people always think you have the right to be places you weren't designed to be. You show up. You stand there. You make everyone uncomfortable. And when someone tells you the truth, you act like you're the victim. The phrase, "you people," landed like a brick on a glass table. Several guests looked away. One man at a nearby table set his napkin down and stared at the tablecloth. A woman in a red dress pulled out her phone and held it low, the camera light blinking. Margaret Harrington appeared at her husband's elbow. She touched his arm. "Victor, people are watching." "Good." He didn't lower his voice. "Let them watch. Someone needs to say what everyone's thinking." Margaret glanced at Naomi, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say stop. She didn't say leave her alone. Instead, she leaned into her husband's ear and whispered, just loud enough for Naomi to catch. "Just make it quick. We have the auction in 20 minutes. Not once did she look Naomi in the eye. Not once did she acknowledge that a human being was standing 3 feet away being torn apart by her husband. To Margaret Harrington, Naomi was not a person. She was an inconvenience between cocktail hour and the silent auction. Hold on. This man called her "you people," threw her badge on the floor, and his wife said, "Make it quick, we have the auction." 300 people watching. Not one stood up. I don't know if I could have stayed like Naomi did. Most of us would have walked away. He turned back to Naomi. "Last chance. Walk away." "I can't do that, sir." "Can't or won't?" "Both." The word was quiet, but it landed. Harrington's face darkened. He reached out and grabbed her volunteer badge. The lanyard snapped against her neck as he yanked it free. He held it up, read her name, and tossed it on the floor. "Naomi Anderson." He said it like he was reading a parking ticket. "I'll remember that. And I'll make sure the people who hired you remember it too. You will never work another event in this city. I will personally see to it." Naomi looked at the badge on the marble floor. She bent down, picked it up, and clipped it back onto her scrubs. Her hands did not shake. "You're done," Harrington said. "No, sir." She looked him in the eye. "I'm not." A murmur rippled across the nearest tables. Someone whispered, "Did she just say that?" Another voice, quieter, "Good for her." But no one stood up. No one walked over. The murmur died as quickly as it rose, smothered by the weight of Harrington's name on every wall in the room. Across the ballroom, Ethan Cole stood with his back against the west wall. He had been watching the exchange since Harrington first walked toward the nurse. His training told him to intervene only if his client was in physical danger. His client was not in danger. The nurse was. But it wasn't the confrontation that bothered Ethan. He had seen Harrington berate staff before, valets, waiters, hotel clerks. It was ugly, but it was predictable. What bothered him was something else. When the nurse bent down to pick up her badge, her left sleeve pulled back. Just for a second. Just enough to reveal the inside of her forearm. Ethan saw a scar. Not a surgical scar. Not an accident scar. A shrapnel scar. Jagged, raised, about 4 inches long, running from the wrist toward the elbow. The kind of scar that came from an IED blast or a mortar fragment. The kind of scar Ethan had seen on dozens of Marines, and on one person in particular, in a place he had spent 11 years trying to forget. His stomach dropped. He told himself it was a coincidence. Lots of people had scars. It didn't mean anything, but his hands had already started to sweat. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a name was rising. A name he had not spoken out loud in over a decade. A name that every man in his unit carried like a debt they could never repay. He blinked. He refocused. He told himself to stay professional, but he could not stop looking at that scar. Harrington did not walk away. That was the thing about men like him. Winning was never enough. He needed the other person to know they had lost. He stood over Naomi with his champagne glass dangling from 2 fingers, staring at her the way a man stares at a stain he has decided to remove personally. "You think you're brave?" His voice carried across 3 tables. "Standing there, refusing to move? You think that makes you something?" Naomi kept her eyes forward. She did not respond. I asked you a question. He snapped his fingers an inch from her face. When I talk to you, you answer. That's how this works. I've said everything I need to say, sir. Oh, she's said everything she needs to say. He turned to the nearest table, arms spread, performing for them now. Did you hear that? The volunteer nurse has said everything she needs to say. To me, in my building, at my event. He paused, letting the words land. That's the problem with this country. We give people like her an inch, and they think they own the room. A man at the nearest table let out a small, uncomfortable laugh. His wife elbowed him. He stopped. Harrington turned back. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who couldn't cut it. 12 years as a nurse. No promotion. No title. Working for free at events where the appetizers cost more than your rent. He leaned in. You're here because no one else wanted the job. And the only reason they let you through the door is because it makes the foundation look good on paper. Diversity hire. Check the box. Move on. Naomi's jaw tightened. Just barely. If you weren't watching closely, you would have missed it. But Ethan, across the room, saw it. And he recognized it. Not as anger, as restraint. The kind of restraint that came from training, not temperament. That was the second thing that didn't add up. Margaret Harrington had drifted to a nearby table, chatting with the wife of a hedge fund manager. But she was listening. When Victor paused to take a breath, she called over without turning around. Victor, darling, don't waste your energy. She's not worth the champagne you're breathing on her. A ripple of laughter from the surrounding tables. Polite, controlled. The kind of laughter that people offer when the most powerful person in the room has made a joke, and not laughing feels dangerous. Naomi heard it. Every note of it. She had heard laughter like that before, in places where laughter meant something very different. In places where the people laughing were the ones who survived, not because they were brave, but because they looked away at the right time. Harrington fed on it. He straightened up, emboldened. You know what? I'm going to do you a favor. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it up, then dropped it on the floor in front of Naomi. That's my assistant's number. Call her tomorrow. I'll make sure you get a real job, something appropriate. Cleaning crew, laundry service, something where you don't have to pretend you belong with actual professionals. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who genuinely believed he was being generous. Naomi looked at the business card on the marble floor. She did not pick it up. No? Harrington raised an eyebrow. Too good for charity now? From a woman who showed up here for free? I didn't come here for charity, sir. Then what did you come here for? She looked at him, steady, calm. To help people. Something about the way she said it, not defiant, not angry, just true, made the room go quiet for a beat longer than it should have. Even Margaret stopped talking. Even the jazz quartet seemed to pull back on their tempo. Harrington didn't like silence. Silence meant he wasn't in control. Help people. He repeated it slowly, tasting each word like it was sour. That's rich, coming from someone who can barely help herself. He set his champagne glass down on Naomi's medical station, right on top of the first aid kit, deliberately. Let me tell you something about helping people. Helping people costs money, real money. I've donated more to this foundation tonight than you'll earn in your entire life. So don't you dare stand there in your discount scrubs and tell me about helping people. He pushed the glass. It slid across the folding table and knocked over a bottle of antiseptic solution. The liquid spread across the white tablecloth in a slow, dark stain. Naomi watched it spread. She could have stepped back. She could have cleaned it up. Instead, she stood still and let it drip onto the marble floor between them. Are you going to clean that up? Harrington asked. That's not my job either, sir. Harrington turned to a silver-haired man 2 tables away, a hospital board member named Caldwell, who had flown in from D.C. for the evening. Richard, are you seeing this? He pointed at Naomi like she was an exhibit. This is who they put on the medical team. This. Are you comfortable with that? Are your patients comfortable with that? Caldwell shifted in his seat. He did not answer. His wife gripped his arm under the table. No? Nobody wants to say it? Harrington scanned the room, arms wide. Fine. I'll say it for all of you. She doesn't have the training. She doesn't have the credentials. And she sure as hell doesn't have the breeding to stand in a room like this and tell me, what her job is and isn't. He grabbed a cloth napkin from the nearest table and threw it at Naomi's feet. There, that's your job. Pick it up. Naomi looked at the napkin. She looked at Harrington. She did not bend down. Pick it up. She didn't move, not a muscle. His face flushed red. The veins in his neck pulsed. He was not a man who lost arguments, and he was losing this one. Not because she was fighting back, but because she was refusing to break. Every response she gave was short, measured, unshakable, and every word made him look smaller. The woman in the red dress was still recording. Her phone was angled directly at Harrington's face now. She was not trying to hide it anymore. A waiter approached from the side, carrying a towel. He knelt down to wipe the spilled antiseptic. As he passed Naomi, he whispered without looking up. Hang in there. 2 words, barely audible. But Naomi heard them. She nodded once, almost invisible. At the west wall, Ethan Cole had stopped pretending to scan the room. His eyes were locked on the nurse, on her posture, on the way she held her ground without raising her voice, on the way her left hand hung at her side, fingers slightly curled, the exact hand position a combat medic used when preparing to reach for a tourniquet. He had seen that hand position before, 11 years ago, in a burning Humvee, in the dark. His heart was hammering now. He told himself it was adrenaline from watching the confrontation, but it wasn't. It was something deeper. Something from a night in Kandahar when the world was fire and shrapnel, and the only voice he could hear through the smoke was a woman's voice, calm as a Sunday morning, saying, "I've got you. Don't let go. I've got you." He looked at the scar on her forearm again, then at her face, then at the way she stood, weight balanced, shoulders square, chin up, hands ready. Not like a nurse, like a soldier. The room between them was 60 feet wide, filled with champagne flutes and silk napkins, and people who had never been afraid for their lives. But to Ethan, it felt like the distance was shrinking, like the ballroom was falling away and being replaced by sand and smoke and the sound of rotors overhead. He needed to get closer. He needed to see that scar up close. He needed to know. But he stayed where he was, because Victor Harrington was walking back toward the nurse, and this time, he wasn't talking. He was reaching for her arm. Harrington grabbed Naomi's left arm and yanked it toward him. I want to see what kind of nurse has this much attitude. He twisted her wrist upward, exposing the inside of her forearm. What's this? A prison tattoo? A knife fight? What gutter did you crawl out of before? He stopped, because behind him, someone was saying a name, and every sound in the ballroom died. Captain Anderson. Ethan Cole's voice came from 20 feet away. It was not loud, but it cut through the room like a rifle shot through fog. His face was white. His hands were shaking at his sides. He was walking toward them, not like a bodyguard, like a man walking toward a ghost. Harrington still had Naomi's arm. He turned, confused. What did you just say? Ethan didn't look at him. He was looking at Naomi, at her face, at her eyes, at the scar on her forearm that he was now close enough to count every ridge of. Captain Naomi Anderson, his voice cracked. 3rd Medical Battalion, Forward Operating Base Shaker, Kandahar Province, August 14th, 2015. The ballroom was silent. 300 people held their breath. Naomi looked at Ethan. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, not fear. Recognition. The kind that lives in the body, not the mind. Sergeant Cole, she said quietly. Ethan's eyes filled. He didn't wipe them. He didn't look away. You pulled me out of a burning Humvee. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silence, every person in the room heard it. You pulled all of us out, 14 men. The vehicle was on fire. RPG hit us at the convoy checkpoint. Everyone was screaming. I couldn't feel my legs, and you... He stopped, swallowed. You came through the smoke. You were already bleeding. Shrapnel had torn through your arm, and you didn't stop. You dragged us out one by one. 14 men. You went back 14 times. A woman at the nearest table covered her mouth with both hands. The man beside her set down his fork and stared. That scar, Ethan pointed at Naomi's forearm, the arm Harrington was still holding. I bandaged that wound myself. After you pulled the last man out, after you collapsed, I wrapped it with my own shirt because we were out of gauze. Harrington's grip loosened. He looked down at the scar like he was seeing it for the first time. His hand dropped. She received the Medal of Honor, Ethan said, turning to face the room now. His voice was steadier, harder. The President of the United States pinned it on her chest. She is the only woman in her battalion's history to receive it. She saved 14 Marines, including me, with a piece of shrapnel in her arm and a tourniquet made from a bootlace. The murmur that moved through the ballroom was not polite anymore. It was stunned. A man at the third table, the same man who had laughed at Harrington's jokes 5 minutes ago, pushed his chair back and stood up. He didn't speak. He just stood, like a witness rising in court. Then the woman next to him stood, then another, then 6 more. They stood in silence, facing Naomi, and in that silence was an apology that none of them had the courage to say out loud. Caldwell, the board member Harrington had called on for backup, covered his face with both hands. His wife was already crying. Not for Harrington, for everything she had watched happen and said nothing about. A veteran near the back of the room, a man in his 60s with a Korea service ribbon pinned to his lapel, raised his hand to his forehead in a slow, deliberate salute. He held it. He did not put it down. And that's not even the part that should scare you. Ethan turned to Harrington. For the first time all night, the bodyguard looked his employer directly in the eye. After she left the military, Captain Anderson developed a trauma treatment protocol that revolutionized emergency field medicine. She patented it. She licensed it to every major hospital network in the country. He paused. Including yours. Harrington's face went gray. Anderson Medical Group, Ethan said. The anonymous founder. The trust that holds the licensing rights to the technology your entire hospital chain runs on. He pointed at Naomi. That's her. Harrington took a step back. Then another. His champagne glass, the one he had set on her medical station, was still there, empty, tipped on its side. He bumped into a chair. He didn't notice. He shook his head. That's not possible. Sir. Ethan's voice was flat now, professional, but underneath it, something was burning. You just slapped the woman who saved my life. You just slapped the woman who owns the technology that keeps your hospitals running. You just slapped the woman who founded the charity you're standing in. The room erupted. Not in applause, in noise. Chairs scraped, people stood, phones came out, not 1 or 2, but dozens. The woman in the red dress was already streaming live. The word Medal of Honor rippled from table to table like wildfire. Margaret Harrington stood frozen at her table, one hand on her pearl necklace, her face the color of ash. Harrington opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Naomi pulled her arm back. She straightened her sleeve, covering the scar. She looked at Harrington, not with anger, not with triumph, with the kind of calm that only comes from having survived things he could never imagine. You asked me what I came here for, she said. I told you, to help people. She picked up the antiseptic bottle from the floor, set it back on her station, and turned her back to him. The most powerful man in the room was standing in the middle of 300 witnesses, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Ethan Cole unclipped his earpiece. He removed the lapel pin with Harrington's company logo. He set both on the nearest table. Then he walked to Naomi's station and stood beside her. Not behind Harrington, beside her. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The room understood. The first thing Harrington did was reach for excuses, the way drowning men reach for anything that floats. I didn't know. He held up both hands. His voice had lost every ounce of authority it carried 5 minutes ago. How was I supposed to know? She was wearing scrubs. She looked like... there was no way to... To what? A voice came from 3 tables away. General Raymond Pierce, retired, 2 stars, seated at the Foundation's board table, stood up slowly. He was 71 years old and moved like it, but his voice carried like cannon fire. No way to what, Mr. Harrington? No way to treat a human being with basic decency unless you know their rank first? Harrington's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. I served with Captain Anderson's battalion commander, General Pierce said. I was at the Pentagon ceremony when she received her medal. I have shaken the hand you just slapped. He adjusted his jacket. And I will be making a phone call in the morning. The room was no longer a ballroom. It was a courtroom, and Harrington was standing in the center of it without a lawyer. Margaret was already moving. She crossed the floor, grabbed her husband's arm, and pulled him toward the exit. We need to leave, now. Wait. Harrington turned back toward Naomi. I want to apologize. You want to apologize? Ethan stepped forward, blocking his path. 5 minutes ago, you called her filth. You threw her badge on the floor. You slapped her across the face. And now you want to apologize because you found out she's important? He shook his head. That's not an apology, sir. That's damage control. Harrington stared at the man who had protected him for 2 years. The man who opened his car doors and swept his hotel rooms and stood in the rain outside restaurants. That man was now standing between him and a nurse in white scrubs, and there was nothing Harrington could do about it. Ethan, he tried the first name, the familiar tone. Let's talk about this privately. I resigned, sir, 30 seconds ago. We have nothing to talk about. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. Someone near the back started clapping. It spread, slow at first, then faster. Not thunderous, steady. The kind of applause that meant something. It was not for Harrington. By the time Margaret dragged her husband through the double doors, the gala had already split in 2. Half the room was on their phones, calling publicists, texting lawyers, refreshing Twitter. The other half was gathered near Naomi's station, not crowding her, but standing close. A silent wall of witnesses. The woman in the red dress had posted her video 60 seconds after the slap. By the time Harrington reached the hotel lobby, it had 4,000 views. By the time his car pulled onto 5th Avenue, it had 40,000. By the time he got home, it was on CNN. The headline wrote itself. Billionaire slaps black nurse at charity gala. She's a Medal of Honor recipient and his biggest supplier. Inside the ballroom, a man in a charcoal suit approached Naomi's station. He was calm, unhurried, and carried himself the way people do when they bill by the hour. Miss Anderson, he extended his hand. I'm Thomas Reed. I represent Anderson Medical Group. I was here tonight as a guest of the Foundation, but as of right now, I'm here as your attorney. Naomi shook his hand. Thomas, I told you to enjoy the evening. I was. Until your business partner assaulted you in front of 300 people and 14 cameras. He opened his phone. I've already contacted the firm. We're reviewing every active licensing agreement with Harrington Health Systems, all 42 hospitals. He looked at her over his glasses. And I've called the police. Naomi nodded. She didn't argue. 2 NYPD officers arrived at 10:14. They took statements from 11 witnesses. They photographed the red mark on Naomi's left cheek, which had deepened into a bruise the color of a ripe plum. They reviewed 3 separate videos from guests' phones. At 10:41, they issued a criminal complaint for assault in the 3rd degree against Victor James Harrington. The gala did not resume. The auction was canceled. The jazz quartet packed up and left without being paid. But the Hearts for Heroes Foundation received more donations that night than in all 5 previous galas combined. Every single one came with the same note, or some version of it. For Captain Anderson, the real hero in the room. The video hit 30 million views in 48 hours. It was everywhere. CNN ran it on a loop during the morning segment. Fox News debated it for 3 panels straight. MSNBC opened with it at prime time. The New York Times published a front-page feature under the headline, "The Nurse, the Billionaire, and the Scar That Changed Everything." The Washington Post ran a companion piece titled, "Who is Captain Naomi Anderson?" The answer, it turned out, was a story the country hadn't heard, because Naomi Anderson had never wanted anyone to hear it. After receiving the Medal of Honor in 2016, she had quietly declined every interview request. No book deal, no speaking tour, no documentary. She had told the Department of Defense that she wanted to return to civilian medicine and be left alone. They respected the request. The media moved on. Her name faded from public memory. But the internet does not forget. Within hours of the video going viral, military bloggers had pulled up her service record. Her Medal of Honor citation, 4 paragraphs of dry Pentagon prose, was being read aloud on TikTok by veterans with tears running down their faces. The hashtag, "The Angel of Kandahar," trended in 22 countries. And then the business story broke. A reporter at Bloomberg, following the trail of Anderson Medical Group's corporate filings, confirmed what Ethan Cole had said at the gala. The anonymous trust behind Anderson Medical Group was controlled by one person, Naomi Anderson. The company held patents on 3 critical trauma treatment technologies used in over 600 hospitals nationwide. Its annual licensing revenue exceeded $900 million. Its founder had never drawn a salary above her nurse's pay at Mercy General. The implications for Harrington Health Systems were immediate and catastrophic. On Tuesday morning, 3 days after the gala, Thomas Reed held a press conference outside Anderson Medical Group's Manhattan office. He announced that the company was initiating a full review of all licensing agreements with Harrington Health Systems. 42 hospitals, 16 states, over 11,000 employees whose daily operations depended on Anderson Medical technology, from trauma imaging protocols to automated triage software. "We are not acting out of vengeance," Reed told the cameras. "We are acting out of principle. Anderson Medical Group does not do business with individuals or organizations that condone violence, discrimination, or the dehumanization of healthcare workers." Mr. Harrington's conduct at the Hearts for Heroes Gala represents a fundamental breach of the values this company was founded on. By Wednesday, Harrington Health Systems stock had dropped 14%. 2 major investors, a pension fund and a sovereign wealth fund, quietly pulled their positions. The board of directors called an emergency session. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Victor Harrington walked in as CEO. He walked out as nothing. The board voted 9-2 to remove him from his position, effective immediately. The press release used the words "mutual agreement," but the Wall Street Journal reported that Harrington had been escorted from the building by security, his own security, the ones he still employed, and that he had shouted profanity in the elevator on the way down. Margaret Harrington filed for divorce the following Friday. Her attorney cited irreconcilable differences. The tabloids cited the obvious. The Harrington fortune was collapsing, and Margaret had no intention of going down with it. She was photographed leaving their Greenwich estate in a black SUV with 6 suitcases and a Pomeranian. She did not look back. Harrington tried to go to his club in Midtown the following week. The manager met him at the door and told him his membership had been placed under review. He tried to book a table at Le Bernardin. The hostess recognized his name and said they were fully booked for the next 3 months. He walked through the lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, the same lobby where he had once been greeted by name, and the concierge looked through him like he was made of glass. The doorman did not open the door. A woman passing on the sidewalk stopped, looked at him, and said, "You're the one who slapped that nurse." She didn't wait for a response. She kept walking. He stood on Fifth Avenue in a $4,000 coat and realized that for the first time in his life, his money could not buy back what he had lost. Not his reputation, not his name, not the way people looked at him. But the legal consequences were only beginning. On the Thursday after the gala, 3 former employees of Harrington Health Systems filed a class action lawsuit alleging a pattern of racial discrimination in hiring, promotion, and termination. The lead plaintiff was a black radiologist who had been fired after filing a complaint about racially hostile comments from a supervisor. Within a week, the lawsuit had 23 plaintiffs. Within a month, it had 61. The EEOC opened a formal investigation. Internal emails surfaced in discovery, emails in which senior Harrington executives used language that made Victor's behavior at the gala look restrained by comparison. One email, sent by the VP of Human Resources, referred to a diversity initiative as a box-checking exercise for the optics people. Another, from a regional director, contained a joke about black doctors that was so vile the judge ordered it sealed from public record. Victor Harrington's criminal trial took place 6 weeks after the gala. The charge was assault in the 3rd degree, a misdemeanor in New York, but one that carried the weight of 300 witnesses, 14 camera angles, and a victim who held the Medal of Honor. Harrington's defense attorney argued provocation. He claimed that Naomi had escalated the situation by refusing a reasonable request to relocate. The judge, a 63-year-old woman named Clarissa Hayes, listened without expression. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Hayes said during sentencing, "you struck a woman who was doing exactly what she was asked to do, provide medical care at a charity event. You struck her because she refused to be invisible. You struck her because her presence offended you. And then you were surprised to learn that the woman you struck was worth more, in every sense of the word, than you will ever be." She sentenced him to 180 hours of community service at a veterans medical facility, a $25,000 fine, a mandatory completion of an anti-discrimination education program, and a 2-year order of protection, barring him from any contact with Naomi Anderson. Harrington said nothing. His lawyer said they would consider an appeal. They never filed one. The veterans facility where Harrington was assigned to serve his community service hours was funded, in part, by the Hearts for Heroes Foundation. The foundation's anonymous founder, of course, was Naomi Anderson. No one told Harrington this on his first day. But the nurses who worked there knew, and they watched him mop floors and sort supply closets with the kind of quiet satisfaction that only comes from knowing the full story. 3 months after the gala, Naomi Anderson walked through the front doors of Mercy General Hospital at 5:45 in the morning. Same white scrubs, same sneakers, same laminated badge, except now it had a small dent in the corner from where Harrington had yanked it off her neck. She clocked in. She checked the overnight charts. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the break room, the same burnt coffee that had been sitting in the same pot since midnight, and walked to the ER floor. The nurses at the station looked up when she came in. A few of them smiled. One of them, a young woman named Denise, who had started 3 weeks ago, stared a little too long. "You okay?" Naomi asked. "Yeah, sorry, it's just, I watched the video before I applied here. You're kind of the reason I became a nurse." Naomi looked at her for a moment. Then she handed her a chart. "Bed 4 has a laceration that needs cleaning. Gloves are in the 2nd drawer." That was how Naomi Anderson handled fame. She put it in a drawer and went back to work. The world outside, however, had not moved on. Anderson Medical Group announced a new initiative in October, the Open Access Program. Every hospital serving a community where more than 40% of patients were uninsured or on Medicaid would receive Anderson Medical's trauma technology free of charge. No licensing fees, no contracts, no strings. The program covered 116 hospitals in its first year, replacing the gap left by Harrington Health System's collapse and reaching communities that had never had access to that level of care. Naomi did not attend the press conference. Thomas Reed made the announcement. When a reporter asked why the founder wasn't present, Reed smiled and said, "She's at work." The 14 Marines who had survived the Kandahar ambush held a reunion in November. It was the first time all 14 had been in the same room since 2015. They met at a steakhouse in Virginia Beach. Nothing fancy, just a long table and too many beers, and the kind of silence that only people who have almost died together can share. Naomi came. She sat at the end of the table and said very little. The men didn't need her to talk. They just needed her to be there. Ethan Cole sat across from her. He had taken the position as director of security at Anderson Medical Group 2 weeks after the gala. It was a good job, better pay, better hours, but that wasn't why he took it. He took it because for 11 years he had carried a debt he thought he could never repay, and now he had a chance to stand next to the person he owed it to, not behind someone else, beside her. At the end of the dinner, Ethan pulled out an old photograph, faded, creased, taken by a combat photographer the morning after the ambush. It showed a woman in a torn uniform, sitting on the ground next to a burned-out Humvee, her left arm wrapped in a blood-soaked shirt. She was looking at the camera, but she wasn't smiling. She was just tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. He slid it across the table. Naomi picked it up. She looked at it for a long time. Her thumb traced the edge of the photograph, the burned vehicle, the sand, the sky that was just starting to turn pink. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She slid it back. The next morning, Naomi was back at Mercy General by 5:45. She checked the overnight charts. She poured herself a cup of burnt coffee. She walked to the ER floor and started her rounds. A patient in bed 6, an elderly man with a broken wrist, looked up at her and said, "You look familiar. Have I seen you on TV?" Naomi smiled. "No, sir. I'm just the nurse." She checked his vitals, adjusted his splint, and moved to the next bed. Outside the hospital window, the sun was coming up over the Bronx. The light hit the glass and turned it gold. The same gold as the chandeliers at the Grand Meridian Hotel, but warmer, quieter. The kind of gold that doesn't cost anything. Naomi Anderson had built an empire. She had saved lives on a battlefield and in a boardroom. She had been slandered, slapped, and underestimated by a man who thought power meant volume. And she was still here. In her scrubs, at her station, doing the only thing she had ever wanted to do, helping people. Real talk. This story is fiction. But being treated like nothing because of how you look, that happens every day. Naomi didn't need the reveal. She was worth everything the moment she showed up to help strangers for free. The billions just made them feel stupid. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? Have you ever been told you didn't belong in a room you had every right to stand in? Drop your story in the comments. Because the truth is, the people who try to make you feel small are almost always the ones who are afraid of how big you really are. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and remember, real power doesn't announce itself. It just shows up every single day.